A dog sat quietly beside Pope Francis' coffin, refusing to move no matter how many guards tried to call him away. Most thought it was just an odd display of loyalty, until the moment he suddenly threw his head back and did something that brought the entire basilica to a standstill. So, what exactly happened inside the Vatican that day? First, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. Before he became a symbol of loyalty that would move the world, Leo was just another forgotten soul on the streets of Rome. His fur hung in matted clumps from a frame too thin to support it. Each rib visible beneath his dull coat told a story of hunger. His left ear, partially torn and never properly healed, spoke of fights he hadn't started but couldn't avoid. Most telling were his eyes, wary, distrustful, yet somehow still alive with a fierce will to survive. Each hand that had ever reached for him had meant pain, and he had learned his lesson well. Until that ordinary Tuesday in April when Pope Francis found him. It wasn't planned, wasn't staged, wasn't anything but a quiet moment of connection that no camera captured. The Pope had been walking alone through the Vatican gardens at dusk, a rare moment of solitude in his demanding schedule. He turned a corner near the ancient olive trees, and there was Leo, hackles raised, teeth bared in warning, a creature so accustomed to cruelty that kindness seemed impossible. Francis stopped. The Swiss guards nearby tensed, hands moving instinctively toward weapons. The Pope simply shook his head at them and knelt down, his white cassock pooling around him on the stone path. From his pocket, he pulled a small crust of bread saved from lunch. "Easy, little brother," he murmured in Spanish, his native tongue emerging in the intimate moment. "No one will hurt you here." Leo lunged forward with a snarl, snapping at the extended hand. The Pope pulled back just in time, but didn't rise, didn't retreat. The guards stepped forward, alarmed, but Francis waved them away. "He has known nothing but cruelty," he said quietly, eyes never leaving the trembling dog. "Give him time." So began an unlikely courtship between the leader of the Catholic Church and a street dog too broken to trust. Each day, Francis would walk to the same spot. Each day, leave a little food each day. Wait a little longer. For a week, Leo kept his distance. On the 8th day, hunger overcame fear, and he crept forward to snatch the bread, retreating instantly but taking the offering. On the 13th day, he allowed the Pope's weathered hand to briefly, so briefly, touch his head. And on the 20th day, Leo leaned into that touch, his body still tense, but something in his eyes beginning to soften. The Vatican staff was horrified. "Holy Father, this is madness," Cardinal Moretti protested. "A stray dog in the Vatican? He could be diseased, dangerous." But Francis met their concerns with the same quiet certainty that had defined his papacy. "If we cannot show compassion to the smallest of God's creatures," he said simply, "how can we pretend to serve him?" And so Leo stayed, first in the gardens, then in the residence, eventually becoming a fixture at the Pope's side. The Vatican veterinarians cleaned his wounds and treated his malnutrition. Trainers were brought in, not to break his spirit, but to channel it. And though Leo never wore a uniform or carried a title, he assumed a role that was entirely his own: silent guardian, loyal companion, living testament to the Pope's belief in second chances. In the following years, those who worked closely with Francis often noted how Leo seemed to sense the Pope's needs before they were spoken. On days when the weight of leadership pressed heavily, Leo would appear at his side, resting his head on the Pope's knee while he worked. During long meetings, Leo would position himself at Francis's feet, a warm, steady presence. And when crowds grew too large or tensions too high, Leo would step slightly closer, his body language changing just enough to create a buffer between his friend and the world. He wasn't just a pet. He was a promise kept. Now, as the world gathered to say goodbye to the man who had seen worth in the forgotten, Leo prepared to make his final offering, one that would silence even the greatest cathedral on earth. The morning of the funeral dawned gray and heavy with unseasonable rain that fell in soft sheets across Rome. By dawn, St. Peter's Square was already filling, black umbrellas blooming like solemn flowers across the cobblestones. They came by the thousands, then tens of thousands. Presidents in armored cars, queens with solemn faces, refugees clutching handmade crosses, children hoisted onto shoulders, the powerful and the powerless drawn together by the gravity of a singular life now ended. Pope Francis had not simply been a leader. He had been a shepherd, a voice for those who had none, and now the world converged to say goodbye. Inside the Basilica, preparations moved with practiced precision. Centuries of ritual had prepared the Vatican for this moment. Swiss guards stood at attention in their Renaissance-inspired uniforms, halberds gleaming in the artificial light. Cardinals adjusted their robes and whispered final instructions to deacons. The Sistine Chapel choir warmed their voices in side chambers. Everything was as it had always been for hundreds of years, except for one detail. At the side entrance used only by Vatican officials, Leo waited. No special collar marked him. No ceremony announced him. He simply sat, perfectly still, his once matted coat now clean and brushed, his eyes fixed on the middle distance. Cardinal Battista, who had been Francis's closest advisor for decades, knelt beside him briefly. "You understand, don't you?" he murmured, his hand resting lightly on Leo's head. "Better than most of us." The question of Leo's presence had sparked heated debate among Vatican officials. Never before had an animal been permitted at a papal funeral. Tradition, protocol, centuries of precedent all argued against it. But Battista had quietly insisted. "The Holy Father rescued him," he said simply. "They shared something we cannot pretend to understand. He belongs here today." When the simple wooden casket emerged, Francis had left explicit instructions against anything elaborate. Leo rose to his feet. No command was given, no signal passed. He simply knew. The pallbearers, 6 Swiss guards in formal uniform, moved with measured steps. Leo fell into place beside them, matching their pace perfectly. No leash guided him. No handler directed him. He walked as he had lived these past years, with quiet dignity, born not from training, but from something deeper. The massive bronze doors swung open, revealing the full splendor of St. Peter's Basilica. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, catching on gold leaf and marble. Thousands of faces turned as one toward the procession, and then the whispers began. "The dog," someone said. "It's the Pope's dog." Phones lifted, then lowered again, as if the owner sensed that this moment belonged to memory, not social media. Cameras clicked discreetly from official photographers, documenting what no one had expected to see. The procession moved slowly toward the altar, Leo's paws making no sound against the ancient marble. His head was level, his steps steady. Only those closest might have noticed the slight tremor running through his body, the way his breath came faster than normal. When they reached the place of honor before the altar, the pallbearers carefully positioned the coffin on its stand. White candles burned in tall holders, their flames perfectly still in the hushed air. The cardinals took their positions, the choir prepared to sing, and Leo simply lay down beside the coffin, pressing his body against its wooden side as if to warm it. Across the basilica, 10,000 breaths caught at once. The scene before them transcended ceremony. This wasn't protocol. This was devotion in its purest form. A creature who had once known only fear, now offering comfort to the man who had taught him trust. For the briefest moment, the vast basilica felt smaller, more intimate. Not a monument to power, but a sanctuary for something far more profound. The bells began to toll. The deep, resonant sound of St. Peter's bells rolled across Rome like waves, pulling the city into shared mourning. Inside the basilica, each toll seemed to vibrate through the very foundations. Cardinal Battista stepped forward, the weight of tradition and personal grief visible in every line of his face. His voice, usually firm and commanding, wavered slightly as he began the funeral mass in Latin. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Rows of cardinals and bishops responded in practiced unison, their voices merging into a river of sound that rose toward the soaring dome. The choir began the Kyrie, their trained voices carrying notes of ancient sorrow. Through it all, Leo remained motionless beside the coffin, not rigid, not formal, but with the quiet stillness of absolute attention. His breathing was steady now, his eyes fixed on some middle distance only he could see. The ceremony proceeded through its familiar movements, readings from scripture, prayers for mercy, incense rising in fragrant clouds toward the ceiling where Michelangelo's God reached toward Adam with a finger that never quite touched. Every few minutes, eyes throughout the basilica would drift back to the dog by the coffin. His presence was both jarring and strangely fitting, a reminder of Francis's insistence that faith must be lived in unexpected ways. In the front row, world leaders shifted uncomfortably on hard wooden benches. Presidents accustomed to speaking checked their watches discreetly. Queens trained from birth to show no emotion dabbed at eyes with embroidered handkerchiefs. Near the middle of the basilica, separated from the dignitaries, sat those Francis had championed, refugees from war-torn countries, advocates for the poor, ordinary believers who had seen in him a return to the church's deepest values. And toward the back, standing because there were no more seats, thousands of Romans who had come not because they were Catholic, but because they had loved this man who walked their streets with humility. The Mass moved into its central mystery. The choir's voices rose higher, filling every corner of the vast space. Sunlight shifted through stained glass, painting patches of color across white marble. And then, as Cardinal Battista stepped forward to deliver the final commendation, everything changed. "Into your hands, O merciful Savior, we commend your servant Francis," he intoned, voice steady despite the tears visible on his cheeks. "Acknowledge, we humbly beseech you, a sheep of your own fold, a lamb of your own flock." The organ began the opening notes of the final hymn, a low, somber progression that seemed to rise from the depths of the earth itself. It was at precisely this moment, this threshold between farewell and eternity, that Leo moved. Slowly, deliberately, he rose to his feet. His body trembled not with fear, but with something else, something older than training or instinct. He took a half step closer to the coffin, his shoulder pressing against the polished wood, and then he lifted his head and howled. The sound wasn't loud at first, just a low, keening note that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his throat. But it grew, swelling into a mournful cry that echoed off marble and stone, rising toward the dome painted with saints and angels. The organist faltered, her fingers hovering uncertainly above the keys. The choir's perfectly harmonized voices stumbled, then fell silent. Cardinal Battista's Latin prayer died on his lips. Throughout the basilica, 10,000 people held their breath as Leo's howl filled every corner, every alcove, every hidden space of the ancient church. It wasn't the short, sharp bark of alarm or the growl of warning. It was something primal, grief given voice without shame or restraint. His body shook with the force of it, paws splayed against the marble floor as if bracing against a wave of sorrow too powerful to bear alone. In the front row, an elderly cardinal's face darkened with anger. "This is sacrilege," he hissed to his neighbor. "Someone remove that animal at once." But no one moved, No guard stepped forward, no handler intervened, no one dared break the spell, because what was happening before them wasn't disruption, it was truth. Leo's howl spoke what their careful words and measured rituals could not. It held all the raw anguish of loss, all the bewildering emptiness of absence, all the desperate longing for one more moment with the departed. It was the sound every human heart makes when someone beloved is taken, a sound most spend their lives learning to suppress. Tears flowed freely now, not just from ordinary mourners, but from kings and presidents, from hardened journalists and Vatican officials who had seen decades of pageantry without breaking. A child in the crowd began to cry, not from fear, but from recognition of something his young heart understood without words. Leo's howl eventually softened, fading into a low, trembling whine that seemed to hold questions no one could answer. His body sagged slightly, as if the effort had drained him. He pressed his muzzle against the coffin once more, his breath fogging the polished surface. For several heartbeats, the Basilica remained perfectly silent, 10,000 souls suspended together in a moment beyond ceremony. Then, slowly, hesitantly, the choir found their voices again. The organ resumed its solemn progression. Cardinal Battista, wiping tears from his cheeks without shame, continued the prayer of commendation. But something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted. In that raw moment of unfiltered grief, Leo had broken through centuries of formal distance and reminded everyone present of the simple truth at the heart of their gathering. A good man was gone, and it hurt beyond words. The mass continued, but its rhythm had been altered. The choir sang with more emotion, less precision. The prayers seemed more heartfelt, less mechanical. Even the light filtering through the stained glass appeared somehow different, warmer, more present. But the machinery of Vatican protocol momentarily paused, soon reasserted itself. A senior deacon, face tight with duty, made a small gesture toward the Swiss guards stationed near the side door. Two of them, young men barely in their 20s, faces solemn beneath their berets, moved forward with measured steps. Their boots clicked softly against the marble floor, the sound barely audible above the choir singing. Leo's head lifted at the sound, his ears flattened slightly against his skull. A low rumble, not quite a growl, but no longer the whimper of grief, rose from his chest. The first guard hesitated, his training suddenly inadequate for this unexpected challenge. He glanced back toward his superior, received a firm nod, and continued forward. "Come, boy," he whispered in Italian, extending his hand palm down in the universal gesture of non-threat. "It's time to go." Leo didn't bare his teeth. He didn't snarl or snap, but his body stiffened, pressing harder against the coffin as if he could somehow prevent what was coming. The second guard circled to the other side, trying to create a path, to gently herd Leo away from the center of attention. Leo's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. He barked once, a sharp, panicked sound that cut through the choir's melody. Then he scrambled to position himself between the guards and the coffin, his claws scrabbling for purchase on the smooth marble floor. The congregation stirred uneasily. Some rose half out of their seats, uncertain what was happening. The choir faltered again, individual voices dropping out as all eyes turned toward the small drama unfolding before the altar. Leo's distress was palpable now. He wasn't aggressive. There was no hint of the street dog's defensive anger. This was something else entirely. Pure, unfiltered desperation. Sister Maria, who had worked with Pope Francis since his early days as pontiff, pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. "He's not ready," she whispered to the nun beside her. "He doesn't understand." The guards moved in closer, speaking soft commands that Leo couldn't possibly comprehend. One reached for his collar, trying to secure a gentle hold. Leo twisted away, his body suddenly kinetic with panic. He wasn't fighting the men. He was fighting the separation, fighting the final goodbye that even humans struggle to accept. His paws scrabbled against the marble, seeking purchase, seeking to stay. He cried out again, a sharp, pleading bark followed by a whine so pained that several people in the front rows visibly flinched. It took both guards, plus a third who hurried forward from his post to finally lift Leo bodily from the ground. They did it with obvious care, murmuring soothing words, trying to minimize the disturbance. But there was no dignified way to remove a grieving dog from his master's side. Leo twisted in their grasp, not to escape, but to keep his eyes on the coffin. His paws paddled at air, as if still trying to run back to where he belonged. Small, broken sounds escaped his throat. Not howls now, but the confused whimpers of a creature confronting a loss too profound to process. The congregation watched in stunned silence as Leo was carried down the long center aisle of the Basilica. His eyes never left the coffin. His body never stopped straining toward it. For many present, this unscripted moment of raw emotion cut deeper than any eulogy could have. Here was love stripped of protocol, grief without the cushion of ritual, the very essence of loss laid bare before the eyes of the world. Cardinal Battista made a small gesture, and the choir lifted their voices once more. The organ swelled to cover the receding sounds of Leo's distress. But for those who had witnessed it, the heart of the funeral had already happened. Not in the carefully chosen words or ancient rituals, but in the desperate struggle of a dog who refused to leave the one who had taught him to trust again. Outside the heavy bronze doors and the sudden brightness of the Roman day, Leo still struggled. The guards set him down gently at the top of the wide steps. But Leo immediately spun around, trying to push back through the narrow gap before the doors closed. A junior guard blocked his way, face apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, boy," he said softly. "You can't go back in." Leo's claws scraped against the ancient stone as he tried again to force his way forward. When that failed, he began to pace frantically, whining low in his throat, searching for another entrance. The sound drew the attention of mourners waiting in St. Peter's Square. Some pointed, recognizing the black dog from news photographs over the years. "It's the Pope's dog," a woman explained to her child. "He's looking for him." The guards maintained a respectful perimeter around Leo, not restraining him, but ensuring he couldn't bolt back into the Basilica. They didn't touch him or try to lead him away. Something in the dog's desperate grief commanded a dignity all its own. Inside, the funeral continued with restored formality. The final prayers were spoken, the blessing given. The coffin was prepared for its journey to the burial site chosen by Francis himself, a simple place beneath the Basilica, far from the grand papal tombs. But for many present, the most profound moment of farewell had already occurred, not in Latin verses or incense smoke, but in the unfiltered anguish of a creature who loved without reservation. Outside, Leo's frantic movements gradually slowed. His body seemed to deplete itself, the desperate energy giving way to exhaustion. He settled at the top of the steps, gaze fixed on the closed doors, waiting with the patient hope that only animals seem capable of maintaining in the face of impossible odds. Sister Maria emerged sometime later, her eyes red-rimmed. She knelt beside Leo, stroking his head gently. "I know," she whispered. "I miss him too." Leo leaned slightly into her touch, not in comfort, but in shared understanding. Two souls bound by the same loss. After a while, Cardinal Battista appeared. He exchanged quiet words with the guards, then approached Leo with careful steps. "He would want you to come home now," he said softly, extending his hand. Leo looked up at him, then back at the closed doors. The struggle was visible in every line of his body, the desperate desire to remain against the gradual acceptance of what could not be changed. With gentle persistence, Battista and Sister Maria coaxed Leo to his feet. Together, they led him down the steps and around the side of the Basilica, away from the crowds and cameras, into the quiet gardens where his unlikely friendship with Pope Francis had first begun. Leo followed with heavy steps, his head low, his tail still. But he did follow, one painful step at a time, toward a future he couldn't imagine but would have to face, just as all who grieve must eventually do. In the days that followed, as the world adjusted to the new reality, many would remember the funeral not for its pageantry or important attendees, but for the unscripted moment when grief broke through the careful choreography of ceremony. The image of Leo struggling to stay beside Francis's coffin appeared on front pages around the world. Commentators analyzed it, poets wrote about it, ordinary people shared it with simple captions about loyalty and love. But for those who had been inside St. Peter's that day, no explanation was needed. They had witnessed something that transcended words, a reminder that beneath all our human complexities, our rituals and rules, lies a capacity for a connection so profound it defies our attempts to contain it. And in that reminder was perhaps the greatest tribute Pope Francis could have received, not in speeches about his accomplishments or reflections on his legacy, but in the desperate loyalty of a creature who had once known only cruelty, until a kind hand offered him bread without conditions. In life, Francis had insisted that the measure of our humanity lies in how we treat the most vulnerable. In death, one of those vulnerable souls had shown the world what that teaching really meant. Have you ever witnessed loyalty so pure it brought an entire room to silence? If you had been there, would you have fought to let Leo stay by his master's side until the very end? And if you could whisper one final message to a faithful companion like him, what would it be? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and press that bell icon so you never miss another extraordinary story of canine loyalty and courage. And share this with someone who needs a reminder that true bonds never break, even in death. And before you go, check out our other incredible canine stories appearing on your screen right now. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, with another remarkable story that will stay with you long after the video ends.